With 3 college campuses in the city limits, Tuscaloosa has a very large student population. As the student population has grown over the past several years, so has the need for student housing in the city. I spoke with students and recent graduates about their preferences in college living and the availability of it throughout our city.
I have lived in 2 places now. The first one was specifically designed for students, and the second one, the one that I'm in now, is kind of just a family-oriented place. The quietness of the family-oriented one is really nice. Just the homey feel it has.
Well, I prefer a place with more families, but I'm also a graduate of the university at this point. I started as a sophomore in Tuscaloosa and lived in an apartment with 3 other roommates and shared a bathroom with someone. That apartment complex was geared mostly around students. Now I live in another apartment complex that's mainly geared towards families, and there's less students, I would like to think, that live here than at any other place I've lived before.
I have my own room and bathroom, and it's pretty big. The living room is pretty nice, and with my own kitchen with an oven and stuff like that, and a stove to cook on, and own washer and dryer and all that stuff has just been pretty nice to have.
First year I lived in the dorms, and that was the worst. Second year I lived at a place called Campus Way Apartments, and that was slightly worse. And then I lived at High River. What I enjoyed the most about High River was there was mostly families, but also college students. But the college students that lived there were more tame. They really didn't want to party, you know. There was always a few outliers here and there, but, you know, we kept to ourselves, and it was great. Campus Way, it was just the worst. There was trash everywhere, because this one was full-blown students, no families. Trash, you could always hear music. But once I moved to High River, which was more off-campus, it seemed to be much better.
I much prefer living off campus. I got to pick who I lived with, and I technically probably could have done that when I lived on campus, but I've loved that part of it. And the other features of it include not having to lug my groceries up 3 flights of stairs, and I like the fact that I can park at my apartment complex without having to worry about parking passes and things like that you run into on campus.
I like the family aspect of where I live. It's a quiet environment. I don't like partying or loud noises, so it provides me a good study area.
For my first 2 years of college, I lived on campus housing with 3 other people in apartment-style dorms. And then my last 2 years of college, I lived off campus in an apartment that was focused more towards families, not students. I prefer living off campus in an apartment. On campus is loud and people are always around and it's noisy and people have parties. It's much quieter in the apartment.
After campus, me and a group of my friends moved to a house off campus in the Forest Lake area, and then we only stayed a year there, and then moved to an apartment where we stayed the rest of the 3 years. I prefer the apartment simply because it was nicer than the house and then the dorms, but also like the house and that how I never had to fight for a parking spot.
I think it's great to stay on campus. I can go back to my room anytime, you know, between classes. It's nice to be close to my class. I never have to wake up early, you know, just get to roll out of bed and walk right to class.
I stayed in student housing for 2 years in one of the honors dorms. And then after that, I moved to an apartment off campus on the other side of the river because it's cheaper over there. And I lived there for the other 2 years of my undergrad, and now I live in an apartment kind of a little further. I think there is too much expensive housing at the University of Alabama and a lack of cheap housing. But as far as just generally student housing, I guess we have a sufficient amount because the people that can pay for it do.
The abundance of housing in Tuscaloosa is a little excessive. There's not enough students to fill up those spaces, so they should just stop building.
I think Tuscaloosa has enough student housing. I do think that it is good that they are starting to build more towards campus, the University of Alabama. I think that the idea of having things within walking distance is really good, just because There isn't much parking around many of the university areas. So I think the move towards creating housing in walking distance is a good idea.
I feel like there's way too much, at least apartment complexes that are going up right now, and I don't know how the complex owners or anybody is expected to fill all the vacancies. So, yes, I would say there's way too much going on right now.
I think there's far too many student apartments in the city limits. I think it's really starting to become in a situation in which they won't all sell out, and in fact it's starting to displace some of the more poverty-stricken areas at the expense of student housing, which may or may not be filled.
Mayor Maddox has recently assembled a task force to address any issues with student housing in the area. This has been Andrew L. Grogan for the Shelton State Courier.